The numbers never lied. That was the one thing Cora Webb still believed in. She'd learned it young, watching her father run a dry cleaning shop on the south side of Chicago, balancing the week's receipts at the kitchen table while her mother slept in the back bedroom, too exhausted from dialysis to come out for dinner. Numbers didn't care that the rent was 3 weeks late. They didn't soften bad news. They just sat there in black and white and told you exactly where you stood. Now she sat in a windowless room on the 14th floor of a glass tower in the Loop, surrounded by 24 months of financial records that belonged to a man named Rains, and the numbers she was reading were the most dangerous she'd ever touched in her life. Her brother Kyle had lasted 6 weeks inside Rains' operation before his judgment gave out. He'd been hired to drive. It was supposed to be clean work, legitimate logistics, the kind of job that didn't ask questions, but Kyle had always had a weakness for easy money and a talent for convincing himself he was smarter than the people he worked for. He'd skimmed from the transport manifests, rerouting partial loads, pocketing the difference. $22,000 over 2 months. Not much in the grand scheme of things, but Elliot Rains didn't operate in grand schemes. He operated in ledgers, and in his ledger, $22,000 with Kyle Webb's fingerprints on it was a debt with a very specific interest rate. Rains hadn't killed Kyle. He'd done something smarter. He'd called Cora. She was a forensic accountant, or she used to be, before a federal conviction had stripped her of her CPA license and made her unhireable everywhere that mattered. Now she was a woman with an excellent brain and nowhere legitimate to put it, and Rains had offered her a deal. Clean up 18 months of his shell company filings, the legitimate-facing ones that kept the IRS out of his construction business, and Kyle walked free, unharmed, relocated to Phoenix if he was smart about it. That had been 7 months ago. She was not supposed to still be here. "You've been in that file for 4 hours," said a voice from the doorway. Cora didn't look up. She'd gotten used to the way Rains moved through a room, or rather, the way he didn't. He was somewhere in his early 40s, built like a man who had done hard labor for a decade before he had other people do it for him. Dark hair going silver at the temples, a jaw that looked like it had been in an argument with a wall and won. He wore charcoal suits that probably cost more than her first car, and he had a scar on his right hand, thick, pale tissue running from the base of his thumb up past his wrist that he never bothered to hide or explain. "Kyle's balance was cleared 6 weeks ago," she said, tapping the edge of the page with her pen. "You told me I was free to go." "I did. I'm still here." "You are." He stepped into the room, looking down at the files spread across the table. He had a habit of hovering over her work without touching it. A strange restraint for a man who controlled half the legitimate construction contracts in Cook County. Which means one of us hasn't fully thought this through. "I'm the best forensic accountant you're ever going to get for free," she said flatly. "That's why I'm still here." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, exactly, a recognition. "There's a dinner tomorrow night. The Cullen family is flying in from Detroit. Joseph Cullen controls the Eastern Freight Corridor. His people have been circling a particular conversation for 8 months. Cora understood immediately. She set her pen down. "And you want me there as a complication?" "I want you there because I'm not marrying anyone from Detroit," Rains said, with the same flatness he used to discuss permit filings and concrete costs, "and I'd rather they see the reason in person." She should have said no. She knew how to say no. She'd been doing it her entire adult life. But she looked at the quiet, careful way he was waiting. No pressure in it, no performance, just a man laying out the terms of a transaction, and she found herself nodding once. The restaurant was the kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu. Private room, frosted glass panels, a table long enough to seat a small board meeting. Joseph Cullen was 60, heavy, with the particular confidence of a man who had never once been told he was wrong by anyone who mattered to him. His wife, Marion, wore her pearls like a second spine. Their daughter, Kelsey, was pretty and quiet and had said fewer than 10 words since they sat down. Cullen's associate, a man named Aldous, did most of the talking. "We've been patient," Aldous said, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. 8 months is a long time to wait on a handshake. His eyes drifted to Cora. They moved over her the way you'd look at a piece of furniture that doesn't belong in the room. "I wasn't aware you'd be bringing staff." "Her name is Cora," Rains said. He said it the way he said everything, level, final, with the quality of a door being closed. Marion touched her pearls. "You're in accounting, dear." "Forensic accounting," Cora said. Marion smiled the way people smile when they're not actually smiling. How practical. She turned back to Rains. "Elliot, Joe's grandfather and your grandfather had an understanding. Kelsey is a good girl, educated. She would be an asset, someone who can stand beside you, who understands what stability means for a family." "I appreciate the sentiment," Rains said. He picked up his wine glass, dark red, heavy vintage. He didn't drink from it. "I'm not moving forward with the arrangement." The silence had weight. Cullen set down his fork. "You understand what you're saying?" "Completely. The freight contracts are profitable for both of us. They'll stay that way." Rains looked at the older man steadily. "This conversation is separate from business. I won't apologize for that." Cullen's face went very still. He looked at Cora one more time, and this time there was no pretense of neutrality in it. "She must be very persuasive," he said. "She's very good at her job," Rains said. Then he stood, pulling out Cora's chair before she'd registered that the dinner was over. "Enjoy the evening, Joseph. Marion." They walked out. Her pulse was running hard the entire length of the restaurant, but she kept her face even and her steps unhurried because she'd learned a long time ago that you didn't let people see you sweat in rooms like that. In the back seat of the car, she watched the wet Chicago streets rush past and didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, "You know they're going to make it difficult." "They already are," Rains said, looking out his own window. "Cullen's been sitting on 2 of my city permits for 3 months. I assumed you'd noticed." She had noticed. She noticed everything. That was the problem. "Rains." She turned to look at him. "You don't know who you're choosing." He turned. In the dark of the moving car, his grey eyes were steady. "Then tell me." She'd gone over this moment 100 times in her head, the moment when the truth became unavoidable. She'd rehearsed it the way she approached a bad audit. "Here is the fact. Here is its consequence. Here is the door." "I have a federal conviction," she said. Her voice stayed even. She'd had 7 years to practice. "Wire fraud. I was 23. My father's business was failing, and my mother needed another round of treatment, and I couldn't figure out another way to buy time. I falsified the books on a vendor contract. When it unraveled, I was the one holding the paperwork." She looked at her hands. 18 months at Aldous. Lost my license when I got out. Lost most of the rest when the story ran in the paper. She made herself look up at him. "In your world, a partner needs to be clean. Someone who can stand next to you in a room full of people looking for weaknesses and give them nothing to work with. I am not that. I will never be that. And if Cullen's people decide to dig, and they will dig, now, they'll find every last piece of it and use it to make you look like a man who doesn't know what he's doing." She stopped. She waited. She waited for the shift, the recalculation, the polite, efficient way a man like Rains would reclassify her from asset to liability and make the necessary adjustments. He looked at her for a long moment. The streetlights slid across his face in long orange bars. "Good," he said. She blinked. "What?" "Good." He said it the same way, not cruel, not ironic, not softened by any kind of pity, just a man who had heard a fact and filed it correctly. "Cora, I don't need a woman who's never crossed a line. I need someone who knows exactly where the lines are and why people cross them." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and his voice dropped into something lower than she'd ever heard from him. Something that sounded like it had been waiting a while to come out. "You think I don't recognize what it looks like when a 23-year-old falsifies a vendor contract to keep her family's lights on. I built my first operation on 3 sets of books and a very forgiving bank examiner. I know exactly what you did, I know exactly why you did it. And the only thing I'm thinking right now is that you were 23 years old and you were trying to keep your mother alive, and not a single person with the means to help you did." Her throat closed. She hated that. She had been perfectly fine until that particular sentence. "They'll use it," she managed. "Cullen. Anyone who wants leverage." "Let them try." His jaw was set. "I have 14 months of Cullen's financial traffic on a server that my man Arthur manages. I've been patient because patience is cheaper than conflict." His eyes held hers across the dark seat. "I'm done being patient." It took 10 days. Cora worked the paper trail the way she worked everything. Quietly, without rushing, pulling one thread and then another, waiting for the structure underneath it to show itself. Rains brought coffee to the 14th floor at 11 most nights, and left her alone until she came up for air. He didn't hover. He didn't push. He seemed to understand that the best thing he could do was stay out of the way and let her think. She found it on a Tuesday morning, a secondary ledger buried inside the archived files of a dissolved LLC that had managed freight invoicing for Cullen's organization, and quietly, without anyone appearing to notice, for 2 of Rain's own Eastern shipping contacts as well. Duplicate billing, rerouted payments, a side account registered to a name that belonged to no one currently living. The numbers in that account were large, and they had Joseph Cullen's operational signature all the way through. He was skimming from both sides, she said. She spread the pages out carefully, the way she handled anything old and irreplaceable. Her hands were completely steady. From you and from Detroit both, from everyone at the table. Rain stood across from her and looked at the documents for a long time without speaking. He had that quality of absolute stillness he got when he was processing something big, a stillness that used to make her nervous, and now just told her he was taking it seriously. "Scan everything," he said. "Send copies to the Detroit contacts, not originals, and get me the name of Cullen's current operating counsel." She understood. Not law enforcement. Not the federal process she knew better than she wanted to. The mechanism that would matter most to a man like Joseph Cullen. The people he'd stolen from, finding out what he'd done to them. The alliance dissolved 3 days later. The permits Cullen had been blocking came through the following week. There was one night of real trouble, men at the loading dock on the south side. A confrontation that Rains handled with his security detail and 2 phone calls, while Cora sat in a locked 3rd-floor office and watched the minute hand on her phone and didn't let herself think about what was happening outside. When he came back, his shirt was damp from the cold, and his knuckles were cut, and he stood in the doorway of the office and looked at her for a moment without saying anything, just confirming she was there, just making sure. "It's done," he said. She didn't ask for the specifics, some numbers you didn't need to see. 4 months later, the accounting room had good natural light. Rains had moved her work upstairs not long after the Cullen situation closed. A proper desk, proper equipment, an east-facing window that let in the morning grey off the lake. She was working toward relocancia through a process that had required 2 attorneys and careful documentation and the kind of quiet, methodical pressure that reigns with the patience of a man who understood that some repairs take time. She was sitting at that desk on a cold February morning when he came in and set a key ring on the corner beside her coffee. "What's this?" she asked. "The building," he said. "Gates, main entrance, the archive on 12. You've had the run of the 14th floor for months. Seemed like it was time to make it official." She picked up the keys. They were cold and solid in her hand. She thought about the kitchen table where she'd balanced her father's receipts at 14, the pale green walls of the Federal Processing Center at 23, the smell of the small apartment she'd moved into when she got out, cheap carpet, radiator heat, and the very particular silence of a person who has decided to stop waiting to be forgiven for the wrong things. "This is a bad investment," she said. "I've made worse." He pulled the chair across from her desk and sat down in it, forearms on his knees, and looked at her the way he always did when he was saying something he meant. The Cullen situation is closed. The permits are through. I'm restructuring the construction side. Legitimate buyers, legitimate management. It's going to take time, but we're looking at 18 months, maybe less. And then I own real estate and a logistics company, and nothing left that anyone can use to come through a window at 3 a.m. A pause. And you have a license, and a desk, and somewhere that's worth being, if you want it. Cora thought about all the ways to answer that. She thought about what she was actually looking for, not the right words exactly, the honest ones. She thought about a man who had looked at the worst fact she knew about herself and responded, without flinching, without calculating, without any of the pity or quiet recalibration she had been bracing for most of her adult life, with a single word that sounded, impossibly, like relief. Good. You're very bad at negotiating, she said finally. Something in his face shifted. The careful stillness cracked, the way lake ice cracks in March, not breaking, just showing that something real was moving underneath. I know, he said. I've been told. She pushed the key ring back across the desk toward him. He looked at it, then at her. You hold on to them, she said. I know where I'm going to be. He picked up the keys. He turned them once in his hand. Then he tucked them into his breast pocket, close and deliberate, the way a man carries something he has decided not to lose. Outside the window, Chicago was gray and cold and running its indifferent business. The lake flat and heavy on the horizon, the streets full of people who didn't know and didn't need to. Inside the room, the numbers on her desk were clean and honest and exactly what they appeared to be. For the first time in a long time, so was she.